Now let's jump into the final part. Here we'll add a bit of noise to the glass to get rid of that too perfect look and give it a more artistic, stylized feel. Then we'll wrap things up with the final render. Go into the hypershade window. In this empty area, right click and choose Create Node. If we type noise, we can see the redshift noise node. Click on it to add it to the scene. Then connect its output to the material bump input. As you can see, it immediately affects the surface. The colors and forms get mixed and broken up. In the attribute editor, here we can see the newly added node, and from here we can start adjusting its setting. By default, the bias is set to 0.5, which gives us a balanced noise distribution. Here I'm pushing it very close to 0, around 0.005. What this does is compress most of the noise values to our black, so the bump effect becomes extremely subtle. I'm not trying to add strong surface detail here. I just want to slightly break the perfect smoothness of the glass and introduce a very soft handmade wave to the surface. Let's go to fractal section, increase the complexity. This makes the noise very detailed, giving a natural and handcrafted look. Well, next one, amplitude gain. Let's decrease it a little. It controls the intensity of the bumps. A slightly higher value makes them visible but still subtle. And frequency scale, which determines the size of the waves. Raise it to 10. Higher frequency makes the bump smaller and more refined. Well, next, distortion, which keeps the noise controlled without unwanted twisting. Distortion scale adds a tiny irregularity for a more natural, organic effect without overpowering the bump. Let's change it to 0, so keeps the noise fully controlled and uniform without twisting or irregularities. Let's go through this part quickly in the video. I experiment with adding noise on the cork, but it didn't give the look I wanted. Easy, so I decided to skip it in the final render. This way the focus stays on the glass and jelly liquid. Now let's move on to the final part. Open render setting window. Set the primary GI to brute force. It gives us the most accurate and physically correct light balances, especially for the first bounce of light. This is very important for materials like glass, jelly, and translucent surfaces, where light behavior needs to feel natural and detailed. I'm using the secondary engine, Radiance Point Cloud, because it's much faster and helps smooth out the indirect lighting for deeper bounces. It doesn't need the same level of precision as the first bounce, and using IPC here significantly reduces noise and render time while keeping the overall lighting stable. So this combination allows us to keep high accuracy where it matters most, primary bounce, get cleaner results faster for secondary light bounces, and also avoid unnecessary long render times. So brute force for accuracy and radiance point cloud for efficiency. Set the number of rays to 256. When light hits a surface, brute force asks how much light is coming back from the surrounding environment and from which direction. Number of rays defines how many samples are used to answer that question. The more rays we use, the cleaner and smoother the GI result becomes, but at the cost of longer render times. Well, I chose 256 rays because it significantly reduces GI noise, especially in soft lighting areas. It gives stable and clean results for materials like glass and jelly. Also, it avoids the excessive render time you would get from very high values like 512 or 10,024. Set reflection depths to 6. These control how many times light can reflect from one surface to another. I set it to 6 because glass surfaces often reflect multiple times, especially around edges and curved shapes. Lower values can cause reflections to disappear on look clip. But 6 is enough to keep reflections natural and continuous without overkill. And set refraction depths also to 6. This defines how many times light can pass through refractive materials like glass or liquid. Let's set combined depths to 12. This is the total limit for the reflection and refraction bounces combined. I set it to 12 to prevent rays from being cut off too early, allow enough total bounces for complex light paths, keep the render physically accurate without excessive calculations. Think of it as a safety cap that gives the ray enough freedom to behave naturally. So overall, first one is clean multi-bounce reflections, and the second refraction, it means realistic depths through glass and liquid, and third one combined, which we set it to 12, it's safe total bounce limit, and the last one transparency, means stable light transmission. These values give us physically correct result without unnecessary render cost. Unified sampling controls how many samples RedShift can use to reduce noise in the final image. Max samples is basically the upper limit of how many samples the render is allowed to use when it detects noisy areas. I set it to 256 because it gives the redshift enough room to clean up difficult areas. Also, it works very well with glass, refraction, GI, and soft lighting. and it prevents remaining noise without pushing render times too far. The next one, sampling overrides, which allows us to give extra samples to specific elements that are more prone to noise. In this case, I increase light samples to 128 because aerial lights and soft lights are a major source of noise. Glass and translucent material amplify light noise. Higher light samples give cleaner highlights and smoother gradients. Now we're ready for the final render. At this point, I decided to remove the noise node from the cork material as I mentioned earlier. It felt unnecessary here. It didn't really add anything interesting, it just introduced a slightly dirty color to the cork, which wasn't what I wanted. So removing it actually gives us a cleaner and better result. So I think the noise on the glass became a bit too strong. So let's reduce the overall scale. I still want a hint of noise, just enough to break perfection, but nothing excessive. Now let's render. Honestly, I'm happy with the result. We now have a magic potion bottle. The glass has a subtle distortion. It's not perfectly clean or mathematically smooth. That slight imperfection gives it more character and realism and makes it feel more natural and organic. I hope this tutorial was helpful. In the next videos, we'll move on to creating other objects and materials. If you liked the video, feel free to like it. And if you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next ones.